Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of my freshman year, I found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road flooded with strip malls, restaurants, and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. There are very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case. But the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and, to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches, for whatever reason. I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I seemed to be the only one who heard these things. So I shrugged it off as my imagination, and in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large that we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch, covered in plastic but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here was long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, We could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. The moon was so bright, and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I learned from him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit." I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail, while the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes. We made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of "the woods." That really happened, right? It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning and then ran directly for a group of young adults. Not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s. People used landlines, and cell phones were not unlimited. This happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to sit in the country, just outside of town, for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey, and a horse. The family also had dogs, but the family took the dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily because they had this metal lockbox style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbors for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle, and corn, so I guess the lockbox was for safety. Towards the end of the week, she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company, and I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunts and uncles' houses and gotten my own apartment, so I told her I'd pick her up on the way there after I got out of work. We got there around 9:30 p.m., grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner, and they made their hunger known with their animal noises. We made sure they had water, then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house. Single story. The living room was to the left as you walked into the home. There was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Straight ahead was a dining area, and to the left of that were the kitchen entrance and a patio door. They did not have an open floor plan. In the kitchen, on the opposite side, was also a long hall that had several doors. My friend explained that the wife ran a daycare center out of the house. These rooms were play areas for the kids she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest. We watched some TV, ate our leftovers, and talked about people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she had been sleeping on the couch, then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the two huge recliners that reclined so far back that it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I just said I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in a chair with my blanket. We turned off the TV and were talking for maybe 20 minutes in the dark when the motion sensor floodlight started shining through the window, lighting up the room. Now, I really have no idea why people in the country think it's okay not to have curtained their blinds. Because to me, that's insane. We both got quiet, and Amanda said maybe it was one of the cats. Then we start hearing a gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was closest to the window, and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlight timed out, and my friend slid to the floor too. We lay on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden the house alarm started blaring, and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud that we covered our ears, and I started to panic. I swear, I have never been so close to peeing my pants in my life. I began crawling towards the keypad for security, because as I've seen in the commercials, there's a button you push, and a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen says path 1 of 2 is open. Amanda starts to cry a little and hits the call assistance button on the pad, and nothing happens. There's no assistance. I ask her where the phone is, and she says there's one in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices are to go to the kitchen past the windows and next to one of the patio doors, or to go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I asked her where the other patio was, and she said it was in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We go inside the parents' room and it's pitch black. I ask her where's the phone, and she says, I think we have to turn on a light. I really don't want to turn on the light, but I have no choice. I don't have a flashlight, and I didn't bring my cell because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time, and Amanda didn't even get her own cell until after this happened. She turns on the light, and we start looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any windows, but they didn't even have closet doors. We see a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, which is what I had next to my bed at home. We figure if we hit someone with it, it's going to leave a mark. She grabs it, and we continue our search for the phone, looking at the obvious places. We find a cordless phone stand, minus the actual phone. The alarm is still raging. We have a light on, and the person who opened the patio door is bound to notice. That's all I'm thinking at this point. She asks, should we use the locate phone buttons? I look at her and respond, yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking us if we were looking for something. I'm getting mad that I'm scared, and in this situation, standing there, knowing that we have to go to the kitchen, the house alarm stops. It gets country quiet. If you've lived in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors we pass in the hall closed. We double check the security panel, and it still says patio open. Hit the call button, and it still doesn't work. Double checking that the front door is locked before we start in the kitchen. I tell her we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp from the kitchen. We check the patio door near the kitchen, and it's locked. We turn on all the lights, grab the phone, and dial 911. The phone isn't a cordless phone. It's one of the old ones, with a cord attached to a wall. My friend is on the phone with a dispatcher, telling her what happened, and I hear a whistle coming from outside the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about, because I didn't in my thinking that safety was turning on the lights, is that while you have the reflection of the inside on the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you, unless you press your face against the window. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone trying to get someone else's attention kind of whistles, but I don't see anything outside, and I'm not pressing my face against the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to the dispatcher and is crying, and saying she doesn't have the address for the house. She hands me the phone, and I say, "Hello." The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send police to. I ask that she trace the call, and she says something like, "You're house sitting, and you don't even know where you're at." Scared, angry, and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking for it in the junk drawer, on the counter, on the refrigerator, and fully keeping an eye down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of one of those doors is a patio door that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of their lockbox, and then a few seconds later, she removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call because I cannot find anything with an address. Amanda says lowly, she said, "I hope the police find you in time," and hung up the phone. I was so scared and angry at the same time. We knew that there were people outside. We knew that the patio door to the daycare area was open. We did not know what to do. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silent for what seemed like forever, but was probably 1 minute. I picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number for the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what was happening to us. I included the 911 dispatcher and said we really needed the phone number of the town's police department when we heard a huge metal bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone dropped something heavy and metal. Amanda started crying, and I couldn't hold back my fear anymore and started crying too. Whoever was outside was going to break open that patio door, is what I'm thinking. The 411 operator said they were connecting us and would stay on the line with us after getting pissed at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone, and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening to the police. They were then asked to disconnect once we had established a connection. The police asked a few questions, and we heard the whistle again outside, and floodlights all around the house turned on again. I was too scared to look outside, and we had never turned on the patio light, because we had to walk across the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle, and he said that there should be several policemen showing up shortly, and to stay on the phone. We were outside the town limits and knew it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little better, but I was still really scared. He told us that the police had arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the phone and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pastures that ran along both sides of the drive. 2 officers not with handguns, but with shotguns, were walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house, asking for our names. One went to the phone, said they were here, and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house. One by one, they returned. The last one came back in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he searched the barn and the horse scared him, and the horse also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us they didn't find anyone, and that the daycare patio was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered and saw that there was not a broom handle in that one. I then felt dumb because he just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house she was supposed to be responsible for and other stuff I don't remember. After finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look more, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. We were out of there so fast. We got into my car and went to her mom's. I was so mentally exhausted that we fell asleep, and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she really didn't want to go back to the house, but she had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mom told her to take her sisters, and she did. That afternoon, she called me at work. She was really nervous and began telling me that when they went into the house, there were footprints in the poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cop who checked the barn. She said that she didn't know or pay attention. Also, she said that when they went into the barn to feed and water the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits the kids used for 4. Amanda then continues to say there was a note with the word lucky scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon. She thought came from the refrigerator door because the flyer was missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbit's legs, and Amanda asked her mom to find someone else from their church to finish the house sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officer what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called either of us to update us. I was about 11 when this happened. My older cousin Daniel, about 13, and I were playing hide and seek outside in my grandmother's yard. She owned a large farm in Tennessee, just over 1,000 acres, and I grew up there my entire life, as did Daniel. So it was nothing for us to wander off and play in areas that probably weren't very safe for the average kid. But we knew the property like the back of our hands. It just so happened that the day before this happened, a lot of trees were cut down to make room for a new mobile home by the roadside that she intended to rent out for extra income. Daniel and I naturally gravitated toward this new, unfamiliar landscape to play in because it was something new to explore. All of the trees had been stripped of their branches, placed in logging trucks, and hauled off. The branches, however, were all piled in a tangled mess about 50 feet wide and 12 or 15 feet tall. They were packed so densely that you couldn't see through them from one side to the other. It was during the half-hour mark, when it was my turn to find Daniel, that I began to suspect that he was hiding in the woods deeper than our stated rules allowed. I remember calling his name for several minutes and hearing nothing but a quiet giggle coming from the woods. I was in the newly cut clearing, looking into the woods and getting more upset by the minute. Finally, I announced as loudly as I could that if he wasn't going to play fairly, then I was going in to get a glass of tea and watch television with Grandma. I started back up the hill towards the house. It was at the moment I was walking past the brush pile, basically centered beside it, that I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "You," gave up quickly. I stopped. I called out, "Daniel." It didn't sound like Daniel, but the voice responded, "Yes, I am Daniel. I am inside of the limbs." I looked at the brush pile and didn't see anyone. Again, I heard the odd voice call out, "If you do not see me, then you have not found me, and I will have won the game." I stepped closer and yelled out to the voice, "Why are you talking so funny?" The voice replied, "I am inside all of the limbs. Look inside, and you will see me, Daniel." Something felt really strange about the way this guy was talking, but 11-year-old me just rationalized it, thinking maybe his voice sounds different behind the shrubbery, and he sounds like he's talking funny because his voice sounds different. I stepped up to the edge of the brush pile and pulled the branches apart to look inside. And there was Daniel. His head was turned toward the top of the hill, but his body was facing me. I yelled out, "I caught you." His head shifted toward me, and he had the single most disgusting smile I've ever seen to this very day. Imagine if someone has the absolute worst of intentions, and they're trying to hide behind a fake innocent smile to gain your trust, but they couldn't help their glee with the thought that they may have fooled you. That's the best way I can describe the smile. I was so shocked by this wicked facial expression on my cousin's face that I froze in place. The hairs on my neck and arms all rose, and I could suddenly feel my blood running through my body like the temperature had dropped inside my veins. I stammered through my words. How? How did you get in there?" He responded, "I fell into the inside of the limbs. Cousin, I will need you to give me help, or I will continue to be trapped." I didn't notice this time how oddly he phrased his sentences, and it only occurred to me afterward that his lips were not moving when he spoke. He never changed his face from the twisted, unnerving smile. I didn't immediately notice any of these things because I was too distracted by the large stick that was plunged deeply into the side of his neck. I noticed in that moment that he had a slow, steady trickling stream of blood flowing from the half-dollar size stick in his neck and down across his right shoulder and down his chest. That was enough to jolt my feet awake, and before my brain realized I was trying to run, I was already halfway up the hill to my grandmother's house. When I burst through the door to my grandmother's living room, Daniel was curled up in a ball on the couch and crying hysterically. My grandmother was sitting beside him, trying her best to get him to explain what was wrong. But all he would say was that there was a little boy in the woods who tagged him when he was hiding, and he thought it wasn't really me. He wouldn't say anything else. I was crying and shaken up by this point, and I told my grandmother what I had seen. She made both of us some lunch and then called my uncle to come pick Daniel up. I stayed at my grandmother's house that night, and I bet she asked me what happened 100 times. She asked so many questions that it was as if she were committing them to memory. I remember being relieved that she believed me, but at the same time, I just wanted her to tell me it was all in my imagination and help me forget about it. The next day, my grandmother set the brush pile on fire, and I watched for hours from the safety of the living room window as it slowly deteriorated into a pile of ash and ember. My cousin never told me what really happened to him that day. He refuses to talk about it. I will say this though, he wouldn't talk to me for a year and a half after that day. We were so close when we were little. But that event, whatever the hell it was, drove a wedge between us that changed our relationship forever. Hardly anyone knows it, but Windfall, Indiana, exists. It exists in such a way that when you're there, you feel like you're in a completely separate world. No shops, no restaurants, no anything. Just a gas station, a bar, a post office, and some dirt roads. It has an energy to it. You can feel a thickness in the air that offsets your intuition. It makes a human being's natural senses spike, like an animal who knows a predator is nearby. At least, that's how I personally feel about it. The entire place is off-putting. The people aren't much better either. I was only 13 when we moved there. My older sister was 16, and my younger one was 12. Both of them did considerably better than I did, socially, at school, and I was often left by myself at our new home. Mom was working quite a bit and often stayed after hours. She said it was because we needed the money, and I'm positive we did, but I think it was more to keep her mind off the divorce. The new house was small, a 3-bed, 1-bathroom house with a dining room and a living room. We had a fenced-in backyard and a muddy lawn with an old tree sagging over it. It was the dead of winter, and as a 13-year-old girl going through her first of many depressive episodes to come, I submerged myself in the internet. I came home every day to an empty house, made myself a snack, and planted myself on the couch to get lost in a YouTube rabbit hole until my eyes hurt. We'd only lived in the house for a couple weeks, but I was beginning to adjust to a new life. Sure, I didn't like Windfall, but I wasn't afraid of our house. School was miserable, but I cherished my time to myself. I felt as if I was getting a small taste of the adult life that 13-year-old me was so eager to have. I wasn't scared to be alone until I caught sight of him. Sometimes in my YouTube crusade, I'd get distracted by the TV and my laptop screen would fall asleep. I'd look down, jiggle my mouse, and get back to it. But this time, there was a small figure standing behind me in the doorway of my mom's bedroom. Just a short apparition with noticeably spiked hair. He didn't move, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up straight and my skin began to break out in goosebumps. As quick as he appeared, he was gone. I hadn't turned to face him, but I knew in my heart that it had to be a little boy. I wasn't afraid of him. The house was old, and I felt that maybe he was just curious. I didn't get the feeling that he was bad, or that maybe I should fear him. He just surprised me. That's all. It became normal to see him. Most times, he was in the reflection of my screen, Other times, I'd look up and see him leaning against the doorway of the dining room. He was never in color, only a black shadow that faded away as soon as I blink. I didn't want to tell my sisters or my mom. I'd been getting horribly bullied at school nearly every day, and I felt if I were to say something, they'd make fun of me or simply call me crazy. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being alone. Either way, he was harmless. At first. Soon he began to appear closer to me, or things in the house would fall over mysteriously. Cabinets would slam shut, or the TV would turn off. Curtains would sway as if someone had run their hand through them. I'd just blare my headphones and stay put on the couch, staring at my laptop and praying that somebody, anybody, would come home. I'd see him, and my face and palms would begin to sweat. I started to feel like maybe the curious spirit wasn't so innocent. He was teasing me or pushing his limits to see just what he could do to instill fear in me. I'd never tried to talk to him or communicate, and quite honestly, I had no interest in trying. The first time I ever saw him in detail, I was in bed. My little sister and I shared a room, and I had the top bunk while she was on the bottom. I began to wake in the middle of the night, sweaty and my heart racing. Each night, I'd look over the railing of my bed and see him standing in the dead center of my room, staring at my little sister as she slept. He could have only been 7 years old. He was skinny, and he had a red plaid button-up shirt tucked into black pants. He had spiked, bleached blonde hair and pale blue eyes. What stuck out about him was how white his skin was. He looked nearly albino, yet his lips were a shade of deep purple. I'd be too afraid to close my eyes or even breathe. I'd wake up in the nights to come, holding my eyes shut, because I knew when I eyes shut, because I knew when I opened them, he'd be there. Some nights, my sister wouldn't be in her bed because she was still young enough to want to be in Mom's bed. He'd still just stand there, staring, not acknowledging me or letting it be known that he knew I was there, but I knew he knew. As I kept this secret, our household began to fall apart. My sisters and I were constantly fighting. My depression was worsening, and self-harm crept into my daily life. My mother began to drink heavier, and in fits of rage or sadness, she'd say things she didn't mean. She'd changed into a person filled with anger when she'd once been so loving and sweet. My family began to feel like strangers to me. This led to even more time in the house on my own, as my sisters used their friends' houses as an escape. I had made no friends at my new school, so the only thing I could do to get away was to take walks to the gas station, or to play with the dog the next door neighbors kept chained outside to a tree. Every time I'd see the little boy, I'd stop what I was doing and go sit with that dog. I'd stay put for a few hours until someone arrived home. Things hit their peak when it came time for me to bathe. I loved baths, but for some reason, when I took baths at this house, I felt nothing but anxiety. My chest would tighten and burn when I'd lay back to wash my hair, and I'd feel like I couldn't bring myself back up. I'd scream for my mother because I often felt paralyzed with fear. Even just looking at the bathtub gave me an uneasy feeling and sent my heartbeat banging through my ears. Eventually, my anxiety about baths evolved into a full-fledged fear of water. Swimming pools, baths, lakes. It's all ruined for me. When I think back on it, it never felt as if the house had a happiness to it, only darkness, and that same energy that Windfall emitted so strongly made me overcome with relief when Mom let us know that she and my stepdad had worked things out and we'd be moving back home. I couldn't have gotten out of that house fast enough. The only thing I didn't want to leave behind was the neighbor's dog. I had learned to shove away those memories. The little boy's face still popped up in my dreams from time to time, but I'd gotten over my anxiety about being home alone. Mom got better, and she eventually went back to being her old self again. Time passed, and the depression got easier to manage. I'd nearly forgotten about him. We'd all been drinking around the bonfire one night, shooting the shit and talking about old memories. I was 20 now and felt that I could bring up the boy and handle whatever backlash I got from it. I asked my mom if she remembered the house and if she ever saw anything there. Oh, for sure. That place was haunted as shit. Were her exact words. Yeah. My older sister chimed in. There was a little boy there, but he was not a little boy. I felt my heart drop to my stomach. He was evil. I'd always see him running around the dining room table or standing in Mom's doorway. That's why I was always at Olivia's, because I hated that fucking house. She continued on. I told them my story. All of it. I told them why I'd suddenly become so afraid of water and why I hated being alone. It wasn't just him. There was an old woman there too. My mom said she'd stand in the dining room and tell me to get out of her house. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and she'd be standing at the end of my bed staring at me, pissed as hell. That's why I'd get up in the middle of the night and grab your sister out of bed so she could sleep next to me because I was so scared. The worst time it happened was when I woke up and saw that boy sitting on my dresser, swinging his legs. He hopped off the dresser, walked to the side of my bed, and jumped at me. He jumped straight at me and then disappeared. Mom continued on. When we left, I looked up the house, and it turns out an old lady used to own that house, and she died there. What about the little boy? I asked. Yeah, a little boy died in the house back in the 70s. He drowned to death. Since leaving the house, I've returned to Windfall a handful of times to visit family. The energy is still there. That heaviness and overworldliness as the years go on. More and more ghost stories emerge from Windfall and the people who've lived there. Native American, spirits and little children. There's something about that place that falls just perfectly on a wave of paranormal possibility. It radiates with things I don't know if we as a species will ever be able to wrap our heads around. Windfall, Indiana exists, and so does everything else in it.